Today we're going to be taking and doing a flipped video type lesson. Basically, you were supposed to take your spiral home for tonight. If you did not take your spiral home, please just write this on a sheet of paper and follow the directions as we go. And then when you get to class tomorrow, ask me for some tape at the beginning of class, and you can tape it in your spiral so you don't have to redo this. Also remember, you can pause the video at any time so that you can keep up with what we're doing in here if you're not getting the notes in a timely fashion. You should have already set up your table of contents in your spiral in class, and so whichever is your next entry, if you have a teacher who's already had you put something in for your first entry, then this would be your second entry. And the one for today is called Converting Between Equivalent Forms. Make sure you put the page number that you will be on in your spiral. You might be on page 2, and your neighbor when you come in class tomorrow might have had to start this on page 3. That's fine. Just make sure it's consistent for you so that when you study, you know what page to go to in order to look at this lesson. So go ahead then and turn. If you needed to pause to get that down, go ahead. Then go ahead and turn to the page where you're going to take your notes. We are going to do Cornell notes today. We'll be doing a lot of Cornell notes this year. Since this, for a lot of you, might be new, and for some students who were here at Johnson before, this may be review. I'm going to go ahead and do quite a bit of the Cornell notes with you today, including there's a summary piece and there's question pieces as well. I'm going to go ahead and walk you through those today on this first one, and after a little while you'll get more independent where you'll be doing more of that work on your own versus me helping you write the question section of it and the summary. So to do Cornell notes, the first thing we want to do is go ahead and draw a line and come down to where you have about 3 or 4 lines at the bottom and go ahead and draw another line down there. Once you do that, we're going to go ahead and put a title up at the top. On our table of contents, we put Converting Between Equivalent Forms. So I would use the same thing up here, Converting Between Equivalent Forms. Now we're going to actually turn our spiral for this one because we're going to be drawing a graphic organizer and we're going to need a little more space. So once you have that done, go ahead and turn the spiral, and you're going to take and draw kind of an oval right up here. We're going to do another oval over here, and then kind of down here, kind of like a triangle, we're going to put another oval. We're going to draw some arrows here. The first arrow we're going to draw is going to go in that direction. I'm also going to do another arrow here. Then in between these two, there'll be one arrow going that direction, one arrow going this direction, and same thing down here. Now we're going to go ahead and put in our titles for these. This one right here, I'm going to write fraction. Right here, decimal. And down here, I'm going to write the word percent. Those are the equivalent forms that we're going to be talking about today, and we're going to be doing some activities with tomorrow in order to be able to convert between those forms. So I'm going to go ahead and start with between fractions and decimals, and right here I'm just going to write a little note to myself that I remember that if I'm converting from a fraction to a decimal, I'm going to divide, and I don't want to have to write out words if I don't have to, so I'm going to divide my numerator by my denominator. And hopefully we can remember. Let's go ahead and write that out since this is the first time. Numerator, I'm going to put it over this, by the denominator. And don't worry about the spelling so much. We'll worry about that later. And so then I'm going to write a quick little example up here. Let's say I have 3 over 20, and I want to convert that to a decimal. Then I'm going to take, and you've probably heard this before from a teacher, but it's kind of like an ice cream cone. We're going to take and make a little freezer. The ice cream goes inside the freezer. We don't want it to melt. And then we have the denominator outside of the freezer. And to do that, we need to take and divide into here. And so I need to put a decimal point there and add my 0. When I divide into that, that will go in there one time. So I get 20 down here, bring that down, bring down my next 0, and I get 1500ths. So that was my fraction. I converted it to a decimal. Now, if we're going to go the other direction, decimal to fraction, then we're going to change the decimal to a fraction and reduce to lowest terms. So we're going to go ahead and write change to fraction and reduce to lowest terms. And I don't, if you have to get it all squished in there, as long as you can read it, that's fine. So the example for that one, I have 68 hundredths. If I have 68 hundredths, I know that this means 68. It means the same thing as 68 over 100. If I reduce that to lowest terms, you might have to do that a few times to get it down, but I do know at this point I can divide both my numerator and my denominator by 4 because that's the greatest common factor, and then I get 17 over 25. So we finished this part of the section right there. So over here on the left-hand side in Cornell Notes, you write questions that help you for when you study. Well, what we just did right here was convert between fractions and decimals. So my first question over here might be, how can I convert between fractions and decimals? And I have pretty messy writing, but basically, how can I convert between fractions and decimals? Now let's go ahead and move to decimals to percents. Well, to change from a percent to a decimal, I need to divide by 100. So an example for that, let's say that I have 47.5%, and I want to convert that to a decimal. Basically, in order to divide by 100, that means I'm going to move this decimal 2 points to the left. So in my class, what we say is that we're going to move 2 butt cheeks to the left. So that would equal 0.475. So that's pretty easy. Then down here, to change from a decimal to a percent, we're going to multiply by 100. So in this case, let's say I have 85 hundredths. Well, if I'm multiplying by 100 instead of 2 butt cheeks to the left, when we multiply, we go to the right. So we would go 2 butt cheeks to the right, and we'll get 85%. Later in the year, it gets really interesting because sometimes we move 4 and 5 butt cheeks, and that's kind of weird. All right, then right here, we're going to go ahead and put our second question, and it's basically the same as right up here, except how can I convert between decimals and percents? So you would go ahead and fill that in. If you need to pause for a minute and do that, go ahead. And then we're going to go ahead and move into fractions and percents right here. So to change from a fraction to a percent, I can set up a proportion and solve. Set up a proportion and solve. So I'm kind of running out of room right here, and I have quite a bit of room right here, so I think I'm going to go ahead and do both of these examples down here. So I'm going to go ahead and label this A so that you make sure you remember which example goes with which. So let's say I have a fraction of 2/3, and I want to set it to become a percent. Well, percent is always out of 100. It's a part out of a whole. So just like this is 2 out of 3, I need to know what out of 100 this proportion is. So what I would do is I'd go ahead and multiply my 2 times 100, and then I'm going to set up an equation here. So I get 200 equals 3x. And we'll get into solving equations a lot more as we go through the year, but you should have done some of this last year. So then we would divide both by 3 to get my x by itself. And when I do that, I get 66.6 repeating. But I'm going to go ahead and round that to 0.7 and put my percent sign so that I make sure that I show that this is a percent. Then in order to go from a percent to a fraction, I need to change to a fraction with 100 as a denominator. And we're going to label this B because we're going to come down here and put it right down here. So B, so let's say that I have 15% and I want to change that to a fraction. Well, we're going to take, and 15% means that that is 15 over 100. I'm going to reduce it to lowest terms. I can divide both of these by 5, so I get 3 over 20. Now the only thing left, well, we need to do our third question. So I'm going to come over here for my third question. It's actually going to be very similar to the ones that you've already done. So how can I convert between fractions and decimals like that? Well, this time you're going to write how can I convert between fractions and percents. Then the last step for Cornell Notes is that we have to write a summary, and that's what this box is for down here. Now you need to know that we're helping the language arts teachers out this year and trying to make sure that we're really pushing a lot of writing and math. So you need to make sure you are using complete sentences in your summary, or we will be asking you to redo that. So right here, I kind of wrote a quick summary earlier, so I'm just going to take and transfer that for you. And of course, as we move on, the question part and the summary part would be what you would do after we take the notes in the Center for Cornell Notes. So our summary today could be something like, today we worked on converting between equivalent forms of numbers. And a lot of times we'd probably write a few more sentences, but we're just kind of getting started here, so we'll just stick with that for right now. There's one other thing I wanted to show you, and that is how you can use Cornell Notes for studying. Basically, you can take your spiral home and your parents can cover up this section and they can ask you those questions, or you can take and look at this and generate questions. You can even, if you don't even have anybody to study with you, you can cover up different parts of it, or you can even cover up and just make sure you read the summary. But all of those are ways that you can use Cornell Notes to study. The reason we do Cornell Notes is trying to get you prepared for college so you know how to take notes and go back and study. We don't do the Cornell Notes just so that you've got it in here and you never look at it again. This is something that you can use to study for your tests, and if you just would read them over every night, which only takes a few minutes, you would be very surprised at how prepared you'd be for the test without having to do a lot of extra studying. Be ready tomorrow for us to do some more work with this information that you took tonight.